Goodbye, Claire. Kyle ends it with Claire. His 3 final words leave her in tears. On a windswept autumn in Genoa City, the kind where the sky hangs low and argentine over the towering glass of Abbott and the manicured grounds of the Newman estate, the rearmost heartache unfolded on the young and the restless with the kind of quiet desolation only this show can deliver. Kyle Abbott, heir at law to the Abbott heritage and ever torn between fidelity, love, and heritage, stood across from Claire Newman in the Chancellor Park casino where so numerous rumored pledges had formally been changed. The air felt heavy with everything unsaid. For weeks, pressure had been erecting, misconstructions, family hindrance, secrets that refused to stay buried. Claire, determined to sculpt out her own identity beyond the important Newman name, had fought for her relationship with Kyle despite Victor's icy disapprobation and Nikki's conservative dubitation. Kyle, meanwhile, had been caught in a familiar storm, his mama's warnings echoing in one observance, his father's prospects in the other, and the ever-present shadow of his complicated history brewing large. He loved Claire, of that there was no way any mistrustfulness, but love in Genoa City has no way been simple, and on this day, simplicity was the last thing either of them could claim. Claire arrived first, her countenance precisely arranged, her eyes betraying the anxiety she refused to show. She had tasted commodity was wrong from the cropped tone in Kyle's before communication asking to meet. Kyle was no way formal with her, no way distant. But recently, distance had crept by like an unpleasant guest. When he eventually approached, hands buried in his fleece pockets, jaw tight, Claire felt her heart begin to chip before a single word was spoken. He didn't kiss her hello. He didn't reach for her hand. Rather, he stood there, learning her face as if committing it to a chapter he was about to close. Claire tried to fill the silence with hopeful questions. Was this about Victor? About the board vote? About the rumors circulating through Newman Enterprises? But Kyle's silence swallowed each guess whole. He looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep but from the weight of a decision formally made. What Claire didn't yet understand was how deeply the Abbott-Newman contest had clawed its way back into Kyle's heart. Despite moments of consanity, despite participated palms and fragile armistices, the history between their families is virtually woven into the DNA of Genoa City. Victor's recent maneuvering, subtle but unmistakable, had put Kyle in a compromising position at Abbott. Non-public information had blurted. Alliances had shifted. Though Claire swore she had nothing to do with it, whispers suggested else. Kyle believed her, desperately wanted to believe her, yet the damage was done. Jack had questioned his judgment. Diane had advised him that loving a Newman always comes at a cost. And in the boardroom, mistrustfulness is bane. Kyle set up himself forced to choose cover his family's company or continue fighting for a relationship that sounded to enkindle war at every turn. Claire stepped closer, her voice softening. She reminded him of the night they'd stayed up planning a future that belonged to them alone. No last names, no commercial conglomerates, just 2 people determined to be better than the chaos around them. She spoke about alternate chances, about rewriting narratives. She told him she was tired of being penalized for Victor's sins, tired of carrying prospects she no way asked for. For a flicker of her alternate, Kyle's resoluteness wavered. His eyes glistered, and the walls around his heart hovered to deteriorate. But also he allowed. Of Harrison, of stability, of the endless battles that would define a life tethered to constant family warfare. He imagined every vacation overshadowed by commercial strategy, every festivity tainted by dubitation. He loved Claire, but was love enough to survive that? The answer tore through him indeed as he defied it. I can't keep doing this, he eventually said, voice slightly above a tail. Claire sat. She searched his face for consolation, for the sportful wimpiness that always followed moments of pressure. It wasn't there. Rather, she set up futurity. She shook her head, averring they could fix whatever was broken. She offered to defy Victor, to step down from Newman Enterprises if necessary, to prove formally and for all that her fidelity was to Kyle. That was when he realized how important she was willing to immolate, and how illegal it would be to let her. Love shouldn't bear erasing yourself. It shouldn't demand abandoning your family to prove devotion. Kyle stepped back, adding the physical space between them as if distance muscle dull the pang spreading through his casket. Also came the words that would echo across social media and leave suckers reeling. 3 simple words, spoken with pulsing restraint. Goodbye, Claire. Not I'm sorry. Not I love you. Just farewell, clean, decisive, irrevocable. The futurity of it struck harder than any dramatic treason. Claire's breath caught. For a moment she couldn't reuse the meaning. Goodbye meant no further late-night calls, no further stolen kisses in the Jabot elevator, no further rumored dreams about erecting commodity separate from the Abbott-Newman battleground. It meant he'd formally let her go in his heart before arriving at the casino. Gashes welled incontinently, unrestrained and unhidden. Claire had faced commercial harpies and family examinations without recoiling, but this quiet rejection shattered her countenance. She asked him if he still loved her. The question hung fragile in the air. Kyle closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. Love was the problem. Love made this harder. Love made him want to abandon sense and run back into her arms. But he believed walking down was the only way to cover them both from getting casualties in a war neither started. He didn't answer directly. Rather, he told her she merited peace, merited a life not defined by constant conflict. Claire understood what he wasn't saying. He believed he couldn't give her that. The consummation hollowed her out. She had fought so hard to prove she was further than Victor's granddaughter, further than a Newman pawn. Yet in the end, her last name had won. As Claire's gashes fell, Kyle's own eyes brimmed despite his attempt at stoicism. He reached out artificially to wipe her impertinence but stopped himself mid-motion, knowing that a single touch could unravel his resoluteness. Around them, Genoa City carried on, buses passing, distant horselaugh from the domain, unconscious to the quiet implosion of a love story numerous believed could eventually bridge 2 feuding dynasties. Claire's voice broke as she told him she'd have chosen him, every time, no matter the cost. Kyle's jaw tensed because that was exactly why he'd to leave. He refused to let her choose him at the expenditure of herself. In the days that followed, ripples spread through both families. At the Abbott manse, Jack tasted the heaviness in his son's address but honored the familiar pattern of tone immolation. Diane, though relieved the Newman connection was disassociated, couldn't ignore the sadness clouding Kyle's eyes. Across city at the estate, Nikki assured Claire as style as she could, torn between motherly protectiveness and guilt over the everlasting contest. Victor, ever inscrutable, claimed he'd no way trusted Kyle's intentions, yet indeed he sounded unsettled by the visible heartache in Claire's expression. For formally, commercial palms felt concave. Alone in her suite, Claire replayed the moment over and over, the vacillation in Kyle's eyes, the way his voice cracked on the word farewell. She wondered if pride had told him, if pressure from Jack or Diane had sloped the scales. But deep down she knew Kyle's topmost excrescence has always been his need to shoulder burdens alone. He convinces himself that walking down spares others pain, no way completely grasping that absence can wound just as deeply as conflict. Meanwhile, Kyle set up himself standing outside the unrestricted doors of Jabot's boardroom long after meetings ended, questioning whether professional stability was worth the particular void now echoing inside him. Musketeers tried to intermediate. Summer offered guarded sympathy, fating the familiar sting of losing Kyle to circumstances beyond simple incompatibility. Mariah encouraged Claire not to let one heartache define her future. Indeed, unanticipated abettors suggested that maybe timing, not love, had been the true adversary. Yet neither Kyle nor Claire moved to attune. Pride mingled with heartache, forming a hedge neither knew how to cross without continuing fresh injuries. What made the bifurcation reverberate so deeply wasn't explosive treason or reproach but the literalism of it. 2 people deeply in love, separated not by lack of feeling but by heritage, pressure, and fear of repeating generational miscalculations. In a city known for dramatic reversals, this quiet ending felt nearly more woeful. Kyle's 3 words, "Goodbye, Claire," came a turning point, signaling growth laced with remorse. He chose responsibility over love, caution over threat. Claire, though devastated, began channelizing her pain into independence, covenanting no way again to let a family feud mandate her happiness. Still, in true Genoa City fashion, loose ends infrequently stay unfastened ever. Chance encounters at Crimson Lights, boardroom accommodations forcing propinquity, collective musketeers nudging exchanges each moment reignites the undetermined pressure stewing beneath the face. Because if there's one verity the young and the restless has proven time and again, it's that farewell is infrequently the final chapter. For now, however, Claire's gashes and Kyle's haunted expression mark the end of a love story broke by pride and heritage. Whether fate, remission, or unborn bouleversement brings them back together remains uncertain. But on that Argentine autumn in the domain, as three simple words disassembled a participated dream, observers were reminded that occasionally the quietest consummations leave the loudest echoes. In the fate of those three ruinous words, the emotional fallout gurgled far beyond the quiet corners of Chancellor Park and into every polished office, marble hallway, and candlelit dining room that defines life on the young and the restless. Claire tried to tell herself that heartache was survivable, that she had endured worse in her complicated trip to find her place in the Newman dynasty. But this felt different. This wasn't treason fueled by falsehoods or manipulation. It was rejection wrapped in love. Kyle hadn't chosen another woman. He hadn't exposed some secret affair. He'd simply decided that loving her came at too high a price. And that consummation dallied like a bruise she couldn't hide. The morning after the bifurcation, Claire woke before dawn, her pillow still damp from gashes she hadn't realized continued long after she'd fallen asleep. The silence in her suite felt rough. She artificially reached for her phone, half awaiting a communication from Kyle, commodity impulsive, commodity reckless, commodity that would undo the futurity of goodbye, Claire. But the screen remained empty. No reason. No alternate studies. Just the concave absence of him. For the first time since she'd started falling in love with Kyle Abbott, Claire felt the full weight of being alone in a megacity where alliances shift faster than the wind. Across city, Kyle's night had been inversely restless. At the Abbott manse, the familiar comfort of family walls offered no solace. He'd stood by the window for hours, gaping out at the darkened grounds, replaying Claire's tearful expression in excruciating detail. He could still hear the crack in her voice when she'd asked if he loved her. He abominated himself for not answering. The verity had burned on his lingo "I love you" further than I've loved anyone, but he knew saying it would have undone everything. He stressed that if he gave her indeed a scrap of stopgap, they would helical reverse into the same cycle of defiance and counterreaction that had defined their relationship from the launch. Jack noticed the difference incontinently. A father always does. Over breakfast, Jack studied his son's distant aspect. And the way he pushed eggs around his plate without taking a bite. Though he'd harbored enterprises about Kyle's involvement with a Newman, Jack wasn't eyeless to his son's suffering. He gently asked if ending effects had been necessary. Kyle responded with rehearsed countenance, averring it was for the stylish, for the company, for Harrison, for everyone. But when Jack pressed further, questioning whether fear had disguised itself as responsibility, Kyle's jaw tensed. The suggestion cut too close to the verity. Meanwhile, Claire faced her own interrogation at the Newman estate. Nikki approached her granddaughter with conservative tender-heartedness, offering comfort without intrusion. Claire tried to maintain countenance, claiming she understood Kyle's decision, claiming she admired it. But when Nikki asked if she believed the bifurcation was truly about business contest, Claire's precisely constructed facade cracked. She admitted that she didn't know presently. Perhaps it was about Victor's influence. Perhaps it was about Jack's prospects. Or perhaps Kyle simply didn't believe in them enough to fight harder. Victor, ever the strategist, observed the situation with calculating silence. He claimed in curiosity to Kyle's pain, suggesting that the youthful Abbott had eventually honored the futility of crossing a Newman. Yet indeed Victor could see that Claire's heartache wasn't commodity to dismiss. He flattered himself on guarding his family, but at what cost? Had his grim contest laterally destroyed the veritably happiness he wanted for his granddaughter? Though he'd no way state similar dubieties audibly, the question dallied in the reverse of his mind. Days turned into a week, and Genoa City buzzed with enterprise. At Crimson Lights, whispers circulated about the bifurcation. Some believed Kyle would inescapably return to Claire once pride subsided. Others claimed the split marked an endless fracture between two dynasties that had briefly dared to imagine peace. Claire avoided public spaces at first, unintentional to face sympathetic ganders or probing questions. But insulation only amplified her anguish. Ultimately, she forced herself to step back into the world, determined not to let heartache define her narrative. When she eventually encountered Kyle again, it was purely accidental, or so they both pretended. A board meeting at Chancellor Winter's needed collaboration between several commercial players, including Abbott representatives. Claire entered the conference room with her head held grandly, every inch the sunk superintendent. Kyle was formally seated, reviewing documents he easily had absorbed. The moment their eyes met, time sounded to stutter. For a twinkle, neither moved. The room's low hum faded into background noise. There was so important unsaid between them that the air felt electric. Claire chose professionalism over vulnerability. She addressed him formally, agitating daily protrusions and strategic hookups without formally representing their particular history. Kyle imaged her restraint, responding with equal detachment. To an outside bystander, they appeared cordial, indeed collaborative. But beneath the face, pressure coddled. Every accidental encounter of hands over participated paperwork reignited recollections of closeness. Every transitory regard hovered to unravel the countenance they'd so precisely rebuilt. After the meeting, as associates dispersed, Kyle dallied. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, to say anything that might soften the sharp edges between them. But Claire gathered her lines fleetly, offering a polite nod before exiting. The communication was clear. She'd not supplicate for clarity. She'd not chase a man who had chosen to walk down. That quiet quality unsettled Kyle further than gashes ever could. In private moments, Claire began questioning her own part in the bifurcation. Had she undervalued the risk of her family's heritage? Had she been naive in believing love could transcend decades of commercial warfare? She recalled nights when Kyle had expressed frustration over being constantly caught between fidelity and rebellion. Maybe she had dismissed those enterprises too smoothly. Yet she also knew that connections bear courage. And in the end, Kyle's courage had faltered. Kyle, on the other hand, scuffled with remorse that grew heavier by the day. He missed the way Claire challenged him intellectually, the way she refused to let him retreat into annuity. She had pushed him to be better not just as an superintendent but as a man. Without her presence, life felt muted. Exchanges demanded spark. Success felt concave. He told himself the pang would fade, that time would validate his choice. But time, therefore far, only strengthened his query. Musketeers tried subtle interventions. Summer approached Kyle with a blend of empathy and refocused honesty, reminding him that immolating love for optics infrequently leads to lasting fulfillment. She understood the weight of family prospects better than utmost. Her words dallied long after the discussion ended. On Claire's side, Mariah encouraged her not to internalize Kyle's decision as a reflection of her worth. However, Mariah said gently, "That says further about him than it does about you, if he couldn't fight for you." Claire appreciated the support, yet a part of her still endured for Kyle to prove everyone wrong. One evening, unfit to suppress his passions any longer, Kyle drove to Chancellor Park. The casino stood empty under a pale moon, hanging in its stillness. He sat on the bench where their relationship had unraveled, replaying the moment in agonizing detail. He wondered what might have happened if he'd chosen else, if rather of farewell, he'd said, "Stay." Would Claire have forgiven him for the dubieties? Would they face their families united rather than divided? The questions offered no comfort. At the estate, Claire stood by her window overlooking the vast property, meaning her future. She refused to let heartache render her passive. However, Kyle's departure burned a new resoluteness within her. If anything, she'd strengthen her position at Newman Enterprises, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to herself that she could stand singly of any relationship. She began leading Enterprise with renewed focus, earning respect indeed from disbelievers who had formerly dismissed her as sheltered. Ironically, the further Claire thrived, the further Kyle questioned his explanation. He'd induced himself that stepping down would shield her from contributory damage. Yet she appeared stronger than ever. Maybe she had no way demanded protection. Maybe she had only demanded cooperation. That consummation-soaked fate, still, sounded unintentional to let their story close still. An unforeseen commercial extremity forced Abbott and Newman leadership into exigency accommodations. Request volatility hovered both companies, and collaboration came necessary. During tense late-night strategy sessions, Kyle and Claire set up themselves side by side, formally more Frustration lowered defenses. Shared frustration over external pitfalls revivified the cooperation that had formerly clicked them so deeply. In one particularly charged moment, after hours of debate, the room voided until only they remained. Claire leaned against the conference table, rubbing her tabernacles. Kyle approached cautiously, offering a sincere thank you for her sapience during accommodations. The gratefulness felt genuine, stripped of pride. Claire met his aspect. Searching for the guarded distance she'd grown.